Okay, so welcome everybody. This is an exhibition which is dedicated to the legacy of Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. This year is the centenary of Lumumba, and so we are doing an exhibition to honor him and his legacy. Along with Lumumba, the exhibition is also dedicated to E.S. Reddy. And E.S. Reddy is an Indian who grew up in India, in Andhra Pradesh, and then went to New York for his studies, where he joined the UN and became part of the struggle against apartheid. And he is somebody who really for us exemplifies the close connections between Indians and Africans in the context of our liberation struggle and our freedom struggles. This exhibition is dedicated, to Lumumba, but it covers various figures, and we decided to dedicate it to 4 figures: Oliver Tambo from South Africa, Patrice Lumumba, of course, from the Congo, Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, and Amilcar Cabral from Guinea-Bissau. And so we'll cover 4 of these countries in this exhibition. Yeah. So we'll start with the Congo and Patrice Lumumba.
So basically we wanted to start by giving some background about the Congo and what the conditions were under colonialism. And actually the Congo is is a particularly brutal case, because even before it was a colony of Belgium, it was the personal property of King Leopold. So a lot of the atrocities that went on in the Congo, he was not really answerable even to a parliament. It was his personal property, so he could do whatever he wanted. And there was a lot of brutality, like he would ask for a certain amount of rubber to be extracted, and if it was not given to him, then people's limbs would be cut off. And people talk about Hitler, but really one has to ask whether somebody like King Leopold was any better than what was happening in Germany in the Second World War. But also the Congo is a very rich region, minerally rich region. It has a lot of mineral resources, coal, diamond, water resources, which is part of why Belgium was not willing to give up economic control of the nation for a long time. And it is in this context that you get the emergence of a Patrice Lumumba. And Lumumba really grows up hearing about the atrocities in the Congo. He also grows up hearing about the history of rebellion in the Congo. And he gets educated. He doesn't even complete high school, but he works as a postal clerk. And he develops his ideas, his political ideas. And in '58, he actually travels to Ghana, to Accra, to attend the Pan-African People's Conference, which was organized by Kwame Nkrumah. And Ghana had gotten its independence just 1 year before this. And Lumumba and Nkrumah become friends. They exchange ideas, and Lumumba is exposed to the ideas of Pan-Africanism, or the idea that all of Africa has to fight for its liberation, as opposed to one or the other nation fighting alone. And so Nkrumah develops his political program, and his political program is really a program of unity, because at the time there are many political parties, but they're all based on ethnicity, they're based on tribalism, and Lumumba gives the message that what we need is really a people's movement where the people identify with being Congolese, with being African, not with narrow ethnic and tribal divisions, but with the whole of Africa. And so he works among the people, he speaks to the people about these ideas, and of course he has many compatriots in the struggle. These are just some pictures of how the struggle took place. So there's mounting pressure on Belgium, and in 1960 Belgium actually grants independence to the Congo. And Lumumba at the independence speech, Lumumba is made prime minister, while another man called Kasavubu is made president. And actually at the independence ceremony, Lumumba is not supposed to speak, but he does because he wants to set the record straight. And he says, no Congolese can ever forget that we have gained our independence through struggle, a daily persistent idealistic struggle in which we were undaunted by suffering, sacrifice, nor by the bloodshed by our peoples. So he's really a people's person. He emerges organically from the people of the Congo. But of course, right after they're given independence, there's a crisis in the Congo. Because the Belgians do not leave a stable state, and there's a secessionist movement in the richest part of the Congo, which is called Katanga, and the leaders of the secession are supported by the Belgian forces. So, on the other hand, there's also mutiny in the army. So the Belgian generals of the army don't want to give up control, so the Congolese mutiny. And in this situation, Lumumba, this young prime minister, he approaches the UN. And so this is a picture of Lumumba at the UN at a press conference. And his appeal to the UN is really to send in their forces to stabilize the Congo, to support his government. And he primarily ends up dealing with the Secretary General of the UN at the time, this man called Dag Hammarskjöld. And it's a difficult relationship because Dag Hammarskjöld, instead of recognizing the legitimacy of Lumumba's government when he is elected prime minister, he decides to negotiate with the secessionists. And so, and the secessionists, of course, are supported by the Belgians, because Belgium wants to retain control on this region of Katanga. So this is actually a picture of the Shombe, who was a leader of the secessionist movement, along, you can see on the right-hand side of the picture, Dag Hammarskjöld. And the Congo really becomes a test case for the UN, and I think it shows the failure of the UN to handle this crisis. And after this, there's a coup against Lumumba. He's placed under house arrest, and the person who carries out the coup is a military general by the name of Mobutu, who then went on to rule the Congo for the next 32 years in a dictatorship. But Lumumba is trying to escape house arrest, and we'll show you those images here. So these are the iconic pictures of when Lumumba is captured by Mobutu's forces, and he is tortured, he is beaten up brutally, and then at some point taken to the region which has seceded in the Katanga and killed. And in fact, they're afraid that the people will rebel if his body is found, so they dissolve his body in sulfuric acid. And it's only 2 years ago that the Belgian government gave back his tooth to the Congolese government after so many years of keeping it. So, there is this story of this young African revolutionary, and he's only 35 years old when he's murdered. And when the news gets out that he's been killed, there are protests all over the world because people mourn him, they know of his name, and there's anger at the Belgian. And now it's known that the CIA was involved. There's anger at the Western forces who were responsible for this. So this is a picture of protests that were held in Delhi under the leadership of Arun Asaf Ali, who galvanized the Congress to hold this protest. And the slogans say, Belgian imperialism, down with the Belgian imperialism, long live Lumumba, break diplomatic relations with Belgium. And there were also protests all across Africa. So this is a picture of the protests that were held in Accra, Ghana. And the signs read, you killed Lumumba, we know. Nkrumah shall reign forever.
After Lumumba is assassinated, there is effort to control the secessionist movement in the Congo, and there are actually many Indians involved in the whole Congo crisis. One of them is Rajeshwar Dayal, who is who goes there as he's an Indian diplomat, but he leads the UN mission in the Congo, and he reaches the Congo just as Lumumba, pretty much just as Lumumba is captured, and he plays a very important role there, and he gives these honest reports, but he is. Unfortunately, the Americans turn against Dayal. Mobutu turns against Dayal, and so eventually he has to leave. But then the Indian army goes into the Congo. It's little known, but close to many thousands of Indian soldiers, close to 10,000 Indian soldiers went into the Congo and fought against the secessionist forces in Katanga, and they fought against the Belgian forces in Katanga.
The rest of this room is dedicated to Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana. Ghana was the first sub-Saharan nation, African nation to gain its independence. And Nkrumah studied the Indian movement and employed the methods of civil disobedience in his own struggle. They called it positive action. So these are just some pictures of the struggle in Ghana. And then next to it, you see a picture of Nkrumah giving his Independence Day speech, and you can see that they're wearing Gandhi caps, and that's because those were the caps that were worn in British prisons, and for them it really symbolized that they were not here as kings or rulers, but really they oppressed the ones who had been imprisoned, who are now taking power on behalf of the people. But of course, Nkrumah also plays this huge role on the world stage in relationship with Nehru, and Nehru and Nkrumah were very close. And this is a picture of the Bandung Five, the five leaders who led the non-aligned movement. So you have Nehru of India, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Nasser of Egypt, Sukarno of Indonesia, and Tito of Yugoslavia. And the Bandung Conference really becomes this platform for Afro-Asia to come together for the first time to talk independently of the West. And Nkrumah, of course, is the face of Africa in all of this. And Nkrumah was as I said, very close to Nehru. He visited India in 1959. And in his trip, he visited many scientific institutes. He visited factories to see how development in India was taking place. So you can see quickly some of those pictures. This is actually a picture in Bangalore. But then, like the story of other African nations, Nkrumah is also removed from power in a coup when he is visiting China. And he had to spend the rest of his life in exile outside of Ghana, in Guinea. And we feel that this is really the story of Africa. All of this heroic leadership that comes up through people's struggle, but then is cut short in assassinations and coups. And this is a picture of Nkrumah when he hears news of the coup.
So this section is about the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. In many ways, this is one of the longest and one of the most evolved struggles in Africa. And it really starts in some ways with Gandhiji's campaign. Gandhiji spent 21 years in South Africa, and he was the Natal Indian Congress was founded in 1894, and in many ways set the basis for how political organizations in South Africa henceforth function. Then this here is a picture of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit addressing the UN General Assembly in 1946. Even before India became independent, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, as part of the provisional government, went and addressed the UN, and she spoke against the atrocities in South Africa and got a lot of applause. India broke off its diplomatic relations with South Africa in 1946. There was a big Indian community in South Africa. This is a picture of Durban, where these Indians had come in either as indentured labor, in some cases possibly as slaves, but also as traders. And this is a picture of Mother India, the famous movie, in 1958. Many Indians in South Africa played a big role in the South African struggle. We wanted to highlight them. This is a picture of Yusuf Dadu, a doctor who played an important role in the anti-apartheid struggle, and particularly in uniting Indians and Africans in the struggle against racism and apartheid in South Africa. Another Indian here is Monty Naikar, and Naikar, Dadu and an African, A.B. Shuma, who then led the African National Congress, signed this historic Three Doctors Pact in 1947, which really called for a united struggle against racism. Dadu and Naikar were also close to Nehru and Gandhi. But this section is really dedicated to Oliver Tambo, this heroic figure, really the father of the revolution in South Africa, and we'll cover more about him in the later section. But we have some photographs of how apartheid was in South Africa. Here you can see a white man hitting an African boy who's begging on the streets. And a second photo really shows the segregation. You have a European section, a white section, and then a black section in the railway station. And blacks were not allowed to travel freely in their own country because of this kind of segregation and aboutization in South Africa. But there was this campaign, and the three young leaders of the African National Congress who emerged were Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and Walter Sisulu. And they provided leadership for this movement. And this is a defiance campaign that happened in 1949 because of these leaders pushed for a more radical program. And it's like a satyagraha. So in many ways, our Indian freedom struggle inspired the kind of campaign that happened in South Africa. But the apartheid government cracked down on these campaigns. And there was a treason trial where many of these leaders were tried. And you can see among the leaders who were tried, there are both Africans and Indians in this treason trial. By 1955, the struggle had really developed, and there was a mass movement in South Africa under the African National Congress. It was a multiracial movement which was really fighting against this apartheid system, and they had this freedom charter. All shall enjoy equal human rights. The people shall govern. And the African National Congress movement really built up. But then the apartheid state cracked down on them. And in 1960, there was the Sharpeville massacre, where unarmed protesters were shot upon by the police, and many people were killed. The ANC was banned soon after this Sharpeville massacre. Oliver Tambo was deputed to help build worldwide support for the anti-apartheid movement. And here he is arriving in this picture in Tanzania. And you can see there's a woman behind him, an Indian woman, Frene Jinwala, who helped him obtain travel documents. And the Indian government actually helped Oliver Tambo get travel documents so that he could travel around and get support for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. By this time, this is a meeting of Oliver Tambo with Nelson Mandela, and by this time the leadership decided that they need a military wing, and so the military wing called a Spear of the Nation in translation was formed, and that they could no longer just have a non-violent movement. But then Mandela and Sisulu were arrested, they were given life imprisonment, and so it really fell upon Oliver Tambo, and who in this famous Morogoro conference in 1969 said, we have to close ranks, we have to intensify the struggle. In the international campaign against apartheid, Oliver Tambo worked very closely with E.S. Reddy, who we mentioned earlier, and they participated together in having boycotts, on sports, on cultural boycotts, economic boycotts, and the two of them were like friends. And here is a picture of Oliver Tambo addressing the Special Committee Against Apartheid, which E.S. Reddy was heading. And Reddy would really compare Oliver Tambo to our own freedom struggle and our leaders of our own freedom struggle. Another person who was very close to the South African movement was Romesh Chandra, shown here, who was the president of the World Peace Council. And Romesh Chandra was also shaped by a freedom struggle and the communist movement in India. Many of the South African leaders became members of the World Peace Council, including Yusuf Dadu, who we saw earlier, and Oliver Tambo. And then finally, this is just to show, a little bit more of the international movement. This is a conference of trade unions against apartheid, and this is a photo of Winnie Mandela. Because Nelson Mandela was in prison, often it fell upon Winnie Mandela to lead the struggle in South Africa, which she did, even though she was imprisoned several times and brutalized, and she's another heroic figure of this great anti-apartheid movement in South Africa.
So the fourth struggle we wanted to cover in this exhibition is of Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau is a very small country, but really it was put on the map by its leadership, which was, one of which was Amilcar Cabral. And Amilcar Cabral was trained as an agronomist, so he traveled the country, meeting people, peasants in all parts of Guinea-Bissau. And Guinea-Bissau actually had a guerrilla struggle. So it was an armed struggle against colonialism. The next picture is actually a picture of Amilcar Cabral with Fidel Castro of Cuba. And we wanted to include this because Cuba actually played a huge role in the African liberation movements. And Cuban doctors were sent to many parts of Africa. In Angola, Cubans fought in the army against the racist regime. The next picture is actually a picture of the liberated zones in Guinea-Bissau, which were established when the guerrilla forces won land. And so this is a picture of an education camp. The next picture is a picture of a marketplace, a people's market in the liberated zones.
In many ways, one of the foundational thinkers of the African liberational movements was an Afro-American man, W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois was a sociologist, he was a philosopher, he was a historian, and he was somebody who is known as the father of Pan-Africanism. Du Bois was organizing Pan-African congresses from a very early period. So this here is a picture of the 4th Pan-African Congress, which was held in New York in 1927. At this point, the Pan-African movement really included Afro-Americans and people of African descent in the Caribbean. But the Pan-African movement was to become bigger and stronger, and the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester had several African leaders who were part of it, including Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, but Du Bois was also involved. So in that way, Du Bois is really one of these founders of Pan-Africanism. Here we show a photograph of Du Bois with the famous Indian writer Mulk Raj Anand. This photo is from later, 1958, but it is to show that Du Bois had these close connections with India. He knew many of the people in the Indian freedom struggle. And this is a very important letter that Du Bois wrote to Mahatma Gandhi in February of 1929, where he asked Gandhi to send him a message for the magazine that he edited, the journal that he edited called The Crisis. And Gandhi responded and sent what he called a love message to Du Bois. And Gandhi and Du Bois had this exchange. Du Bois also had an exchange with several other people in the Indian freedom struggle, including Nehru, Rabindranath Tagore, Sarojini Naidu and others. There was a campaign against Du Bois in the US in the McCarthyite era. His passport was confiscated and he was accused of being a communist. And he said at that time, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called communists." In the end of his life, Du Bois went to Ghana. This is him with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and he was working on an Encyclopedia Africana. This huge project to really make an encyclopedia of Africa. He was to die before he could finish this project. And then finally there are some pictures of Du Bois in the Afro-Asian Writers Conference in Tashkent in 1958. Du Bois was also a novelist, and he wrote this famous novel, Dark Princess, a love story, a romance between an Afro-American man and an Indian princess, which was a metaphor for the coming together of Africa and Asia, Pan-Africa and Pan-Asia, in a unity to make a new world.